Welcome. Settle in. Make yourself at home, in the tranquility of your surroundings. Let the soft hum of your environment be the lullaby that lures you into a realm of comfort. Feel the coolness of your chair, the softness of your cushion. Loosen any tight clothing, slide off those shoes, and let your body sink deeper and deeper into a salubrious cocoon of comfort. Release all your day's worries and let your mind float in the gentle sea of tranquility. But do this now, while you still can, because soon your serenity will be shattered into thousands of shards like a pane of brittle, weathered glass dropped onto rock-hard concrete. We are about to embark on an eerie journey into the world of specters and phantoms, the chilling, the disheartening, and perhaps the too familiar. For now, we embark upon the tale of Martin's ghost.
Part 1. Birthday card and favourite faux fountain pen in hand, Martin plopped down at the desk in his den. He sat back with a wry smile and jotted, "Happy 40, you old geezer." He thought it clever, as very soon he would be 1 year younger than his friend. But having made this grand beginning, Martin's train of thought quickly derailed.
Who in the hell is that?
Martin exclaimed, his eyes focusing on the framed photograph sitting on his desk. He picked up the picture and scrutinized it from various angles. He even pulled it out of its frame and examined the front and the back, as well as the glass and the cardboard backing. It was lightly covered in dust, having sat in the same place without dusting for quite some time. There was no visible sign of tampering. The picture appeared to be the same one he'd been looking at for years, with one critical exception. As usual, Martin saw a much younger version of himself standing next to his buddies Jim and Kirk. He had the same goofy smile on his face that he'd always sported when hanging out with his friends back then. Martin had celebrated his 24th birthday on the day of this photo, and from what he'd heard of it later, he gathered it had been a good one. His strongest memories were of the hangover the day after. The picture had been taken while the night was still young. In the center of the frame stood 3 lively young men, Martin, Jim, and Kirk. They were modestly good-looking, their faces radiant with the unspoiled charm of youth, their eyes gleaming with anticipation for the night ahead. The backdrop to their youthful optimism was Martin's '69 Camaro, an old beast of a car, its bodywork marked by the passage of time and miles of road, yet holding an undeniable allure for 3 young guys. Captured on film by Martin's father, it was a snapshot of times gone by, a ticket to a past filled with laughter, camaraderie, and youthful carelessness. For many years now, this photograph had occupied a cherished spot in Martin's den, standing right next to his computer, an ever-present reminder of the golden days. Martin, who had settled into a life in his hometown, often found his eyes drifting towards the photograph. His friends, on the other hand, had followed the call of ambition and moved far away to work in Silicon Valley startups. Yet through the magic of technology, they kept in touch. Every call, every text from them made Martin glance at the photo and smile at their younger selves, freezing a moment of their lives on a piece of glossy paper. The photograph was a window into the past, a way to keep his friends close despite the distance. He viewed it often, daily in fact, the captured smiles of his friends providing solace as they cemented their bond. Yet, the photograph that had long been familiar had suddenly taken a strange turn. This time, as Martin looked at it, he was met with an unexpected surprise. The photo did not show just the 3 bright-eyed 20-somethings trying to look cool in front of the dented, primered old Camaro anymore. This time, behind those 20-somethings, there was a shadowy silhouette, an intruder of inexplicable origin. Martin stared at him intently. There was no mistake. For the past 15 years, the man did not exist, at least not in this photo. Now there he stood. Martin thought, oh shit, am I seeing a ghost? Upon inspection, the man had all his appendages, at least those not obscured by the boys standing in the foreground. He didn't appear to be levitating. No background objects shone through him. No church spire appeared to have hurled itself into him where he stood. His head had not spun itself around full circle, and he carried no bloody knife or open noose. Yet although he lacked such obvious otherworldly traits, there were other strange aspects to his countenance. He wore a hat and overcoat that didn't suit the season. More puzzling, his image was blurred and his face was difficult to make out, as if the camera had managed to lose focus on just that portion of the photo. Martin vigorously scratched the top of his head and repeated under his breath, "What the hell?" his voice trailing off. For Martin, head-scratching was a sign of utter confusion. Years ago, he'd nearly scratched himself bald trying to comprehend certain portions of the tax code before a CPA exam, and was saved only when his professor explained to him that the code was, like so much bureaucratic excrement, indecipherable, indigestible, and quite malodorous in close quarters. Martin always appreciated the professor's candor and colorful turn of phrase. In this case, however, he had no chowder-headed congress or special interest group upon which to blame this conundrum. The enigma stood right in front of him. As Martin stood in puzzlement, these thoughts seemed to waft up from his ears, bind themselves into a large, messy knot, and then plummet to the pit of his stomach like a rock striking dry earth from on high. "Leah, come look at this!" He was scratching more intensely as the rock-solid knot lolled about his empty stomach. "Honey, come on, we're late for the party. Let's talk about it in the car," came Leah's response from the living room. Leah, his wife, was the practical one, or as she would put it, focused. He knew the tone in her voice. Ghostly interlopers or not, she was not prepared to wait for him. Martin considered taking the photo with him, but decided against it. He knew the party would not be the place to spring mysterious apparitions on his wife. He climbed into the passenger seat of Leah's Turbo 350Z, and she backed out of the driveway. Leah had turned on the stereo, opened the sunroof, and smoothly shifted into third, before Martin had even started to gather his thoughts. Eventually, he got there. When he did, he couldn't hold back on spilling his guts about his mystifying discovery. "You know that picture on the right side of the desk in the office? The one with me, Jim, and Kirk?" Martin said, setting the context. "The picture of your 24th birthday when you guys drank too much and you almost got arrested for trying to swim naked in the community pool?" "Nope. Never saw it." "Yeah, well, what I never saw was the guy standing behind me in the picture. I mean, I've looked at that picture almost every day for the last 15 years and I've never seen this man. And now, he's there." The dramatic rise in volume in Martin's voice was abrupt and startled Martin as much as it startled Leah. Just like the uninvited specter in the photo, Martin's anxiety was sudden and out of place. "Martin, you were really drunk that night. You probably just didn't notice," Leah responded. "Think about it." His mind started cranking numbers. 15 times 365. That's almost 5,500 times I didn't notice. Martin was getting more flustered as he thought. He was starting to wish he'd brought the photo after all. "Okay, Mr. Human Calculator, so you didn't notice some guy in the background before. What's the big deal? I can't recall seeing anyone in that photo other than you and your friends, but that doesn't mean he wasn't there. We all focus on what we expect to see and miss the details." Now she was gathering steam. "You remember that article about how scientists miss major discoveries because they focus on their expected results? So what if we didn't pick up on everything in the background before? I bet you can't remember which shoes I'm wearing right now." "I'm talking about a picture that I've looked at almost every day for the past 15 years. And this guy is not a little figure off in the distance. He's right there behind me." Martin stopped briefly to emphasize his point. "The big deal is that this guy wasn't there, and he's never been there, and tonight he's there, whatever he is." "Well, Martin, this isn't Harry Potter. People don't move around from picture to picture," she argued, and then waited momentarily for this point to take hold. "Are you okay? I know this whole firm thing has been stressing you lately." Leah paused again and simultaneously downshifted both the car and the conversation. "Hey, honey, I've been waiting all spring to go to the beach. Can't you take a day off next week? I know things are crazy at work, but we both deserve it. Let's go have some fun." Martin could see this discussion was going to be as productive as trying to nail tofu to the wall. He didn't need a day at the beach. He needed the picture. He took a couple breaths and stifled his growing frustration. "No, I'm fine, really. You're probably right about the photo," replied Martin, but what he really thought was, "Yeah, well, seeing is believing. That thing is in my photo. Wait till we get home." "Let's enjoy the party, Marty." Leah always liked the upbeat sound of that rhyme. Martin never said anything, but he hated it. Part 2. They arrived at the party a fashionable 10 minutes late and headed in for the celebration. Martin, however, spent the rest of the night making small talk and stewing on that odd stranger, standing uninvited in his 24th birthday. On the drive home, Leah was chatty. She relived her discussion with Beth about how Beth's ex-husband was still the same rat he'd always been, and how she'd gotten into a political discussion with Stan's parents and wasn't sure if she'd offended them by offering her views on the problems with the city council. Martin did all he could to keep the conversation going, even though his mind was constantly gyrating back and forth from the night of his 24th birthday to every time he could recall looking at that picture. It was like trying to add figures with a broken calculator. No matter how he punched the numbers, things just didn't add up. When they arrived home, Martin went straight to the den and grabbed the photo. Jacket and keys still in his right hand, picture frame now in his left, he stared with disbelief. Once again, the locomotive of thought that had been building steam within him all evening launched itself off the track. The large rock that wobbled about in his stomach earlier returned with new vigor. The specter was gone. Martin repeated the process of scrutinizing the photo from different angles. He held it directly under the desk lamp and moved it about. He pulled it from its frame again and scrutinized it. Nothing, just three young, goofy guys and an old car that desperately needed bodywork and a paint job. "I just don't get it," he exclaimed, as frustration battled with bewilderment. "Maybe I do need a day off or something." He sighed heavily and sat down hard, placing the photo back on the desk. It was surreal. Martin simply didn't know what to think. He was ready to blame it on overwork and exhaustion. Still, a little voice in the back of his head quietly spoke to him. "Yeah, ignore the elephant in the room just because you don't know how to deal with it. Just because he's quiet, you think it's best to let sleeping pachyderms lie. You know what you saw?" Leah came into the den with 2 glasses of Chardonnay. She'd heard his earlier burst of frustrated astonishment. "What's that, hun?" she asked. There was no hint of teasing or gloating in her voice. Martin could tell it was a sincere question and tried not to be defensive. He instinctively chose the easy road. That direction was well lit and held the promise of normality. "Well, I just don't get it. Whatever it was, it's not there now. Maybe you were right. Maybe I do need a day at the beach," Martin replied in puzzlement. Leah was relieved. There would be no arguments or wasted time. Problem identified, fix found. Back to regularly scheduled programming. It really wasn't too much of a surprise, though, she thought. It had been less than a year since Martin joined Smith & Vet, a local boutique accounting firm that specialized in corporate valuations. However, the firm was having difficulties lately, and Martin had heard rumors that they had started looking for a buyer. With only months at the firm under his belt, Martin was very worried that he had not had a chance to prove himself. As a result, he was almost obsessed with concern that he might lose his job now, during one of the worst recessions in decades. This, on top of having to cope daily with a new boss. A cast of characters that he often said reminded him of the firm, and the strain of a typically stressful job was a lot to handle. The pressure was clearly weighing on him. Leah put a glass of wine on the desk, slipped her hand around his waist, and handed him the other glass of wine. With a gentle squeeze, she hugged him and said, "Don't worry, sweetie, you're the best man they've got and they know it. Let's go to the beach next weekend." Martin thought about the beach now that he'd agreed to go, but he had difficulty generating honest enthusiasm. Time at the beach meant more time to mentally agitate about work and less time to do it. Part 3. Over the next few days, Martin gradually put the mystery man out of his mind. The pace at work left him with little room to ponder such enigmas. Rumors both inside the firm and without kept all but the executives guessing. And, truth be told, though it seldom was, the execs did a lot of guessing themselves. The routine pressures of the work were enough for most, but the added weight of uncertainty bore heavily on Martin and others. Martin's hours at the office were long, and the week slipped by in a flurry of meetings, spreadsheets, and memos. The following Saturday was sunny and warm. Martin, still lying in bed, gazed out the window and saw a few lumbering, puffy white clouds high up in the sky. They seemed to be inviting him to follow them out to the warm, sandy beach. On the other hand, he had not finished a particularly challenging opinion letter for a client on Friday, and he'd committed to getting it out by Monday morning. It was a very bad time to irk clients, he knew. Leah came out of the bathroom, having showered and changed into one of her favorite beach-going outfits. Martin could see that Leah had intentionally started the trip to the beach before he awoke, and before he could raise the subject of incomplete projects and demanding clients. The jousting was over before he'd even known it had started. "Come on, sleepy boy, the ocean waits for no man," chided Leah as she firmly squeezed his shoulder. Martin quickly decided there was no point in fighting a battle he'd already lost and rolled himself out of bed. "And neither does the wife," he retorted, climbing out of bed. As Leah turned to head downstairs, Martin quickly tossed his phone into the day bag Leah had prepared. He wanted to keep tabs on the office and his clients from beachside. Martin's thoughts drifted back to the office as he stepped into the shower. His work rarely left him wherever he was. Having completed his shower on autopilot, he stepped out onto the plush, chocolate-brown-colored bath mat, his mind now reconsidering comments he'd overheard between two senior partners on Friday morning. They were ambiguous comments, but it sounded as though they were speculating on a possible major defection within the firm. The prisoner's dilemma had begun on high, he thought. The idea of updating his resume flickered through his mind yet again, and his stress level began to rise. Looking into the foggy bathroom mirror, Martin could hardly see his own reflection through the condensation on the glass. "Geesh," he thought. "This is no better than trying to see what's going on at the bloody office." As he reached out with a hand towel to wipe off a patch of mirror, he froze, blood turning ice cold. Fight or flight reflexes instantly kicked in hard. There, in the mirror, he could see a faint image of a man standing just behind him. Martin immediately turned, head first, body following in a quick jerk. As he turned, he raised the blow-dryer as if preparing to subdue the intruder with a bad hairstyle. To his utter amazement, no one awaited his attack. Other than Martin, the room was empty. Except for his own frantic, heaving breath, there was no movement or sound in the bathroom or the bedroom. He frantically looked around both rooms, scanning intently for any sign of an intruder. He was certain of what he'd seen, but he was also now very certain that nobody could have been in the room. It just wasn't possible. It was at least 20 feet from the bathroom to the bedroom door, which, as before, stood closed. The door hinge was old and made a loud, annoying squeak when open or closed. He knew it well because he'd been meaning to fix it for months, but he was fairly certain it had been silent. There was no place in the room to hide, at least not without significant effort and noise, and the window was shut and locked. The man had appeared over Martin's right shoulder, closest to the open doorway between the bathroom and bedroom. That was the direction Martin had first turned. Martin knew that no man could have covered that ground or hid in the instant it had taken him to spin his head in that direction. On the other side of Martin lay most of the bathroom and the walk-in closet, but that area would have been unreachable for the man without running into Martin. Martin put down the previously weaponized hairdryer and sat heavily in the overstuffed armchair in the corner of the room, his eyes and ears still scanning on high alert. His heart pounded and his head reeled. The knot inside his stomach returned in greater proportions. He recognized that faint outline of a man. He'd seen it before. "Damn it, it's just not possible," he screamed inside. Martin started to hyperventilate. Minutes later, Leah found Martin slumped forward in the chair, his head clearly heavy in his hands. Her first thought was bad news from the office. She looked around but could not see the likely messenger of bad tidings, Martin's phone. Perhaps he'd had second thoughts about the beach and was trying to position himself for some excuse. However, as she sat down on the bed in front of him, thinking of the best approach, she noticed that all the color had drained from his face, and the dampness on his forehead looked more like perspiration than shower. "Are you all right, hun?" she asked with deep concern. She reached out and lightly caressed his damp hair. As Martin tried to gather his thoughts to speak, he became very aware of a new danger. He could not simply blurt out that the guy from the picture had now materialized in the bathroom mirror. She'd think he'd gone off the deep end. He was starting to think she'd be right. In fact, he didn't think he could even gradually lead up to describing these events, whatever they'd been. Yeah, I'm okay." He tried to sound convincing, for his own benefit as much as hers. His mind raced and then found some footing as he continued to talk himself out of it. "I was trying one of those super hot therapeutic showers Ted was talking about at the party last night, and I think the heat and steam got to me, that's all. I'm fine. Silly, huh? When did I start listening to Ted?" "Yeah, when did you start listening to Ted?" retorted Leah, jumping at the chance to harp on crazy Ted. "Ted's nuts! Geez, do you remember when he got onto that sesame seed kick and ate nothing but black sesame seeds for 2 weeks? Sarah told me his skin started turning grey. It drove her crazy. I won't tell you what she said it did to his shit. I wish I could forget it. If you're listening to Ted, you do need some time at the beach." She paused, as if rethinking his explanation. "Are you sure you feel okay?" "I'm fine," he said, slowly standing up. He didn't feel fine, but he put on a brave face and started getting dressed. "Did you make some lunch, or shall we pick something up on the way?" He knew she loved preparing picnics and would insist on filling a cooler with sandwiches and other goodies. He hoped this line would inspire her to head back downstairs. "Almost done," she said, regaining her enthusiasm. She'd taken the bait. "If you're really okay, I'll go finish up." She rose and started toward the bedroom door. "I'll be ready when you are." "You know where to find me," responded Martin. Again, his attempt to sound upbeat was only moderately convincing, but he noticed it more than she, and Leah continued out the door. Martin took a few tentative steps back toward the bathroom, looking around cautiously and listening closely for movement. He decided to quickly double-check the closet, but found only idle, unoccupied clothes and the other usual items inside. Without any idea of what he really wanted to do or should do, by default he did the obvious and restarted his morning routine. It wasn't easy. He nicked himself 3 times shaving, poked himself in the back of the throat with the toothbrush, slopped on the deodorant as if using a trowel, and decidedly had the worst hair day he could remember. It was on his 4th attempt to find and don a matching pair of socks that he realized he was still distracted to a point near panic. The elephant was bounding around the room again, demanding attention. "Breathe," he thought. "Damn it, breathe." He sat down again and tried to speak to himself in quiet, calming tones. "Breathe slow and even. There is clearly no one here and there is no danger. I don't know what happened. I can't explain it, but it doesn't matter now. One foot in front of the other, left, right, baby steps. Laying on the beach will help, probably just stressing. That's got to be it, all work and no play." This last unfortunate phrase brought visions of a totally whacked-out Jack Nicholson maniacally typing away and wielding an axe in The Shining. "Here's Martin," he thought. "Whoa, I'm being ridiculous," he scolded himself and shoved the image out of his brain, opting as best he could for his last recollection of lying on the beach next to Leah. He walked over to the day bag, removed his phone and dropped it into the drawer. Enough, he thought, but the elephant wasn't sleeping. Part 4. It was a beautiful day at Fairpoint Beach. The handful of fluffy white clouds that greeted Martin earlier in the day appeared to have made good on their promise and followed him out to a spectacularly deep blue sky, floating above warm, clear salt water and soft sand. They found a nice spot near the surf and laid out their blanket. For the rest of the afternoon, Martin and Leah had what was for them a typical visit to the beach. Except for Martin, his day at the beach was no day at the beach. He did his best to enjoy all those things he loved about their trips to the ocean. Leah was still quite beautiful in her bikini. Splashing about like kids and the ease of lifting and holding her in the surf were things he'd cherished. The picnic food was, as usual, wonderful. There were thick sandwiches, each with generous helpings of supple roast beef or turkey, a fine slice of cheddar or Havarti, as dictated by the meat, crisp greens, and a spicy brown ale mustard. Dijon for the turkey, with a dab of real mayonnaise mixed in. Leah's family-famous potato salad, salt and vinegar chips, chilled sangria in a thermos, and a small basket of double chocolate chip cookies purchased by Martin at the nearby bakery that morning rounded out the modest feast. Over the years, many of their likes had coalesced and food was no exception. But today, a large and gruesomely dark cloud in Martin's mind overshadowed all these wonderful things. The delicious food, the sun and sky, the warm water, and his beautiful, caring wife. It rendered them distant and muted. That cloud had the figure of an unknowable, inexplicable, pernicious intruder. Martin's unshakable sense of unease made the whole day an ordeal for him. The quiet spaces in the otherwise pleasant day seemed to create a vacuum into which his anxieties flooded. Leah sensed his distraction, but she tried her best to enjoy the day and make it fun for Martin. A couple of times, Leah attempted to gently remind Martin to relax. She still suspected his stress stemmed from the office. She had chalked up his earlier episode with the photo as a work stress thing, and had not considered it in any other light. Certainly she had no inkling that the stranger had reappeared, let alone in their bathroom mirror. On the way home, they decided to stop at the Two Johns, one of their favorite seafood restaurants. Ironically, the place was run by 2 guys, each named Phil. The inside joke was that the restaurant name wasn't intended as a namesake. This was common knowledge in the area, nor did it reflect the worse rumor that the two owners had first met when visiting the same house of ill repute. Rather, this nom de plume arose from the two Phil's dream that someday they'd be so successful that they would need to expand into a bigger space, sporting not one, but two bathrooms. The name had become a local joke. Fortunately for the Phils, their sense in the kitchen was much better than their marketing sense. The crabs were fresh, as were the hush puppies and asparagus. All of the food was excellent as usual. And also as usual, Martin's thoughts flicked from his present surroundings to his worries and back. He unenthusiastically picked at his food and did not talk much. His responses were generally limited to one syllable each. Leah was enjoying the food, but getting a bit frustrated with her stick-in-the-mud dining companion. She decided to take a more direct approach. "Martin, I know you've got a lot on your mind, but you really need to relax. You've been tense all day. It's not fair to me either, you know." She waited to see which way Martin would blow her trial balloon. He just sat, looking at his crab and letting her words hang between them. The air felt heavy. He didn't know what to say. Leah tried again. "Look, I don't want to make light of this because I know it's bothering you, and it's not a trivial thing. But what's the absolute worst that can happen?" This drew a look of strong surprise from Martin that bordered on shock. He practically turned pale right before her eyes. Leah had expected to tweak him into a reaction, but this was much more than she anticipated. To make things worse, he didn't say anything. Finally, Martin spoke. "Sorry, I think I got a little too much sun. I'm going to go splash some cold water on my face and wash my hands. Be right back." With that, he quickly rose and disappeared down the hall toward the single washroom. It was Leah's turn to feel bewildered. "He's really freaking out," she thought. "How far is this going to go? What am I supposed to do with a husband who's going off the deep end? It's not as though I don't have enough to worry about at work." Part 5. While Leah puzzled and worried, Martin locked the bathroom door and immediately began splashing cold water on his face. "I've got to maintain. I cannot do this. I'm a grown man, a professional, not some nut who talks to himself on the street corner." Martin's inner voice was wavering, cracking, now shouting inside. Then he had a horrifying thought. What if I look up and that demented thing appears in the mirror? Could he follow me? Can he leave the house? Can he come back again? Martin felt himself walking toward the edge of an abyss. He tried to force himself to back away as he thought, "What the heck am I thinking? There is no him. Be a man. Get a grip." With this newly found resolution, he looked up into the mirror to prove to himself there was no him. In the mirror, Martin found his pale, sweaty, tense face and the empty bathroom behind him. Nothing else. He let his breath drain from his lips like a tire with a large puncture, his shoulders practically heaving with relief. Martin continued his internal dialogue. "See? It's all just overwork and stress. Whatever he was, he's not here, and I'll probably never see him again." Martin was having a bit more success at convincing himself this time. He rubbed more cool water on his face and dried himself, taking care to ensure that he didn't look like the wrung-out washcloth he felt like. He walked back to the table a slight bit more his usual self. By the time he reached Leah, his color had mostly returned. Leah stood up as Martin approached. She didn't seem to know what to expect. Martin quickly moved to reassure her. "I'm sorry, love," he started as he gestured for her to sit down at the table and did the same himself. "You were right, I've been stressed, but don't worry, I've got a handle on it. Maybe I got a little too much sun this afternoon. The heat, stress, lack of sleep." He let out an audible breath as if signaling he'd gotten past all this. "You know, but really, I'm okay. Let's enjoy the rest of these crabs. I'm still hungry." He cracked a small, slightly tilted smile. The rest of the evening actually started to feel like old times for the couple. They had the waiter, Phil, bring them a bottle of French Chablis to finish the meal, and they talked about the old days when they'd first met. As the evening wore on, they realized they should either order more wine and find a motel room or get going. They hadn't brought an overnight bag, so they opted to hit the road. Leah had a bit more wine than Martin, and, being much smaller and lighter, felt the effects of alcohol sooner than he. Martin knew she wasn't drunk, but just to be safe, he took command of the keys as soon as they'd paid the bill. After they'd bid thanks and farewell to Phil, the chef, and Phil, the host/cashier/waiter, they found the door only to discover that it had begun pouring buckets outside. "Okay, my love, you hold down the fort here, and I'll bring the wagon." Martin said with a corny flourish and bow. "Why, thank you ever so much, my handsome stud-muffin cowboy," drawled the slightly pickled Lear in a poorly feigned southern accent. With another silly flourish, he dashed out into the downpour. He turned the corner of the building and trotted quickly along the side toward the back lot, taking advantage of the nominal protection offered by the small jutting eave that ran the length of the restaurant's side alley. He reached the end of the partially covered path where the small walkway met the parking lot under the eave. The rain was falling even harder. It looked as though a sizable front had blown in from the coast.
Thank you for watching the beginning of Martin's Ghost. The story continues. Please follow the link in the description